Let's talk about some of the people that are there that we know. Charlotte Walker was a silent screen star. She's really beautiful. She was very successful, and she ended up marrying a Dr. Hayden that was from Galveston. She decided to give up her career and moved to Galveston to live with him, and they raised their family. After the 1900 storm, something happened, and she just didn't want to be there anymore. So she went back to Broadway. This time, first time it was in Hollywood, this time she went to Broadway, had a second successful career, but she did come home to be buried, and she and Dr. Hayden are in this mausoleum, which is still in terrific shape and easily recognizable. Their daughter was actually in all the Andy Hardy movies, Sarah Hayden. You would recognize her face. She's just one of those faces that you think, I've seen her before, but you don't necessarily know her name. Elizabeth Percival. She was a really strong woman. She was an English woman who came to Galveston, ended up marrying a saloon keeper. See it coming. Who led a really rowdy life. He was also abusive, and she ended up leaving him and taking her two stepdaughters. They were his daughters, not hers. She took the two stepdaughters with her, and they started their own life. She opened up the English Kitchen, which was a boarding house and a restaurant on the Strand. The building is still there. And she charged $4.50 for a year's board. Still reasonable, I think. And if you wanted meals on top of that, that was an additional $4 for the year. I could put that in my budget these days. They became very popular. They were well liked. They had a lot of friends. Things were going really great. So by Mardi Gras, 1881, they decided to invite all of their friends over to their boarding house for a huge party because they were right on the parade route. And as they were standing out on their balcony, enjoying the parade, her ex-husband stepped out of the crowd and shot her dead. And there are no more records of the girls. We think they left Galveston because they didn't want their father to find them. So Elizabeth is by herself. She got out, just not far away enough. The beads I had put on her stone in Mardi Gras, I just stopped by and leave her beads on Mardi Gras, but it's amazing how long they stay there. If you're familiar with the neighborhood, it's kind of a rowdy neighborhood. Her beads stay there until they fall apart. Nobody bothers them, which I think is really sweet. Isabella Offenbach Maas. If the name Offenbach sounds familiar, it's because there's a famous composer named Offenbach, and that was his sister. She was an opera singer. Now her husband, Mr. Maas, was on a European tour and saw her performing and fell in love with her. They married while they were over there. It was a whirlwind romance, and he brought her back to Galveston to live with him. They had a family. They lived in a wonderful house. But in the long run, it didn't work, and she ended up divorcing him. She moved in with her oldest son, Max, who lived in this beautiful blue house up here. It's still there. Oddly enough, it was his house, but her historical marker's in front of it because she lived there. But when he built the house, he had his mother in mind because upstairs he built a theater with a stage for her to perform for family and friends. And she still gave performances for her family and friends until she died. This wonderful picture down here a family member provided me with, that is her with all of her grandchildren in Galveston. I think it's pretty amazing. And Edward Lee is one of the most poignant stories of the Civil War. He went to Annapolis to the Naval Academy, and his father actually decided to become a Confederate officer when war was declared. He begged Edward to come to the Confederacy, but Edward said no, he would fight for the Union, and he joined the Navy and commanded a ship called the Harriet Lane. The Harriet Lane happened to come to Galveston for the Battle of Galveston, where his father was commanding the Union troops, and there was a terrible battle. After the battle, word reached his father that Edward had been shot. So his father boarded the Harriet Lane and found his son just before he died, and his last words were, "My father is here," and he died. Can you imagine fighting against your own son and losing him? Another officer named Wainwright was also killed. He was a Union officer. And because they were both Masons, and because the poignancy of the loss of Edward's father struck the community so, both sides declared a ceasefire the day after the battle and had an immense Masonic funeral. They paraded the bodies through the town, and they were buried in the Broadway cemeteries. It was really a sweet sign. And Mr. Wainwright was moved. His marker wasn't, which makes it a cenotaph when somebody's not really there, but it's just a marker. It's a cenotaph. But you'll have people argue that he's still there because it's still marked. But when historians fought to have Edward moved up north, his father, who is still alive, said he would have wanted to lay where he fell. So he's still in Galveston. And he still reminds us the sad part of the Civil War. This is my favorite character of the cemeteries in Galveston. This is Uncle Newton Taylor. He was born in 1831 in Virginia. So we can kind of assume that he was probably at one point in his life a slave. But he did know how to read and write. He was very intelligent. He moved to Galveston, and he was the grave digger, dug hundreds of graves for Galvestonians, and for each grave he dug, he did attend the funeral of that person. He also pumped the organ bellows for the Episcopal Church as his other job, so he was a very busy fellow. He owned his own house that was about a block away from the cemetery, so he could walk to work to either job. Everybody in town knew Uncle Newton. They would stop by the cemetery if they'd see him at work, men, women, and children, and say hi, and he would stop what he was doing and perform magic tricks for them. He was really good with magic tricks. He was famous for them.